The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We spoke yesterday of the terror attack at the Paris offices of a satirical magazine called Charlie Hedbo. The last 24 hours have been incredibly eventful, I guess, to make an incredible understatement. Authorities have identified the three men suspected of being involved in that attack: Saeed Kouachi, 34 years old; Cherif Kouachi, the 32-year-old brother of Saeed; and Hamyd Mourad, 18 years old. Late yesterday, French police released pictures of the brothers and asked for help in finding them. And French authorities said that the youngest of the three suspects just showed up and surrendered to police. Two senior U.S. counterterrorism officials told NBC News that one of the suspects in the attack had been killed and that two others were in custody. And ultimately, it turned out, at least as far as what we know now, Lewis, that it was not that youngest 18-year-old was killed, but rather that he turned himself in. Interestingly, Cherif Kouachi, the older of the two brothers, the 34-year-old, is actually listed in a database and was sentenced in May of 2008 to 3 years in prison for terrorism in Paris. All seven men, Kouachi and the six others, were accused of sending a dozen young Frenchmen to join Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, after sort of funneling them through radical religious establishments in Syria and Egypt. So this is, to some extent, at least one of the three individuals suspected here, Lewis, a known entity.
Yeah, that's the 3-year sentence seems a little light. I think it was probably all just stuff that was in the works, and maybe there were no real plans for an actual terror attack at the time. But doesn't this seem like the type of person you'd want in prison forever if they are, turning young people into terrorists?
It certainly would seem that way, although I would imagine that the crime committed would not correlate with life in prison. Hindsight always 20/20 in these cases. Two police officers who were killed in yesterday's attack, identified as Hamyd Mourad, 40 years old, and Frank Solaro, 49 years old. A lot of media outlets have been releasing cartoons and pictures of Muhammad and this type of thing to kind of show solidarity and show courage. And I agree completely, Lewis, that it is good not to show fear here, because when you do that, you're essentially saying, yes, you have terrorized us into doing exactly what you want. So I agree with that. But step back for a second. How bad have things gotten that publishing cartoons is now a sign of courage?
I guess pretty bad. Depends on the content of the cartoon in this case, and it's something that the radicals despise, and it's something that they try to quell. And so I guess that's really all we can do. I mean, how else do we show that we're not afraid of them?
No, of course, and it's just the absurdity of the situation where just publishing cartoons is considered courageous is incredible. And also, I was struck with the incredible double standard that exists where a picture, a drawing of Muhammad would engage extremists in a way that they commit incredibly heinous acts of terror with seeming disregard for think of the caricatures, Lewis, of the greedy Jew that come from groups like Hamas and the other extremist Muslim groups. Think about that and put it right next to a drawing of Muhammad that is not even, this kind of hook-nosed, money-grubbing, the image we're all thinking of, and the idea that just the drawing of Muhammad warrants terror, while you're simultaneously putting out these caricatures that encompass all of the ad hominem stereotypes against Jews. It's truly just a sickening double standard that exists.
And do we think that if the rabbis from synagogues and Jewish leaders from all over the world came out and said, listen, we want no depictions of, Moses. If you draw Moses, we're going to blow something up, or we're going to persecute you or prosecute you. Do we think that these radical Islamists would respect that?
Of course not. Absolutely not. It's absolutely absurd. Speaking of lack of respect around the entire Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack, the Paris massacre of yesterday, was Fox News' coverage of the incident. And of course, turning it into a concocted Benghazi-like attack on President Obama and the White House. It's truly reprehensible the way that Fox News chose to cover these attacks in Paris. Yesterday, Fox's Gretchen Carlson, certainly a known entity to much of our audience, focused on portraying the Obama administration as this kind of weak-kneed, out of touch, scared of really calling terror after the massacre in Paris. And I'll play for you the little soliloquy, this disgusting monologue from Gretchen Carlson, and then we'll talk about it.
It is what it is. It, meaning terrorism. Terrorism is what it is. So why does the administration continue to have such a problem telling the American people and the rest of the world just that? Is that a disservice to all of us? In some way giving us a false sense of security? That since our own leaders don't see any of these attacks as terrorism right away, neither should we? Keep in mind, at the same time, this administration is more concerned about executive actions for manufacturing and even climate control today and releasing Gitmo detainees.
The problem here is that her premise is just false. Okay, so aside from turning, and remember, folks, we're talking about a massacre in Paris. How in any way is that connected to President Obama's outlook on terror? But let's ignore that just for a second so we can analyze what she said at its face. There was no hesitation whatsoever from this administration to call these acts terror. You had Secretary of State John Kerry, who earlier in the day, not long before this broadcast on Fox News, described this incident as an act of terror. Quote, "The murderers dared proclaim Charlie Hebdo is dead, but make no mistake, they are wrong. The freedom of expression that it represented is not able to be killed by this kind of act of terror." That's the Secretary of State. And you don't even have to stop there. You can go all the way to President Obama, who made a statement that was equally clear that this was terror. Quote, "I strongly condemn the horrific shootings at the offices of Charlie Hebdo magazine in Paris that has reportedly killed 12 people. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims of this terrorist attack and the people of France at a difficult time." Lewis, why won't Obama just call it terror? Why is he so scared?
I think he did. I'm not sure what this means. Maybe Fox didn't play that speech, and so, you know, their viewers maybe have no idea that this even happened. I'm not really sure what the angle is here. I guess it's just blame Obama for anything bad that happens in the world. It's
fear-mongering. It's conspiratorial nonsense. It is lying. It is dishonest. It is not productive. It is not news. It is simply not news. And we've seen this script before. Remember when Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney and other conservatives were criticizing the White House over the Benghazi attacks. Fox News didn't know a thing about Benghazi. They didn't care about knowing a thing about Benghazi. It was a pile on President Obama, and that's just it. And it's the same routine once again, Lewis.
And I think we haven't seen the end of this type of thing. I know it's not news. It's not reporting. You're not, you're not even discussing anything in any meaningful way. You're just trying to destroy the president.
As we talked about in the last few days of December 2014, Louisiana political blogger Lamar White revealed that Republican Congressman Steve Scalise had spoken at a conference of the European American Unity and Rights Organization, known as Euro, a white nationalist organization led by David Duke, a former Ku Klux Klan leader, neo-Nazi, Holocaust denier, etc. And 2 days after Steve Scalise was exposed by Lamar White, he admitted that, yes, he did speak at the conference. He just did not know that it was a white nationalist conference. Almost no one called for Steve Scalise to resign. And I wondered when this story happened, Lewis, I'm sure you'll vouch for me, you were on the show, that I said I wonder if ultimately this is a guy who will end up getting a standing ovation from his fellow Republicans if indeed he doesn't resign. He didn't get a standing ovation, but he did get a round of applause and a cheer in the House of Representatives on Tuesday as the House Republicans re-elected Steve Scalise as Majority Whip, a top Republican post in the chamber, in spite of the fact that he did indeed admit to being a guest and speaking at a white nationalist conference. This is, what do you even say about this? Speaking at a white supremacist, white separatist, white nationalist conference does not even raise an eyebrow, seemingly, in the Republican Party for being in a leadership position, never mind being part of the House of Representatives at all.
Maybe some Republicans would say that, look, you're doing the same thing to Steve Scalise that Fox News is doing to Obama. You're ignoring the facts.
Right, because Steve Scalise spoke at a white nationalist thing and Obama is like a communist or something, right? It's the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think we're just trying to insult the guy, and I don't think we're just trying to make sure he resigns. I think this is genuinely a concern. Obama, to my knowledge, has never spoke at in front of such a crowd or for such an organization.
But Lewis, he did go to Jeremiah Wright's church for a little while. And even though he's not a Christian, we can use his attendance at a Christian church to criticize him when it's convenient. But otherwise, we say he's actually a Muslim.
And I've been to Boston. Does that mean I'm somehow connected with the Boston bombers, the Boston Marathon bombers? You can make all the connections you want out of nowhere.
The statement from the Republicans is loud and clear. Being associated with a Holocaust-denying neo-Nazi organization not only doesn't affect your ability to govern as a member of the House of Representatives on the Republican side, it doesn't even hurt you when you're trying to be in a Republican leadership position. I'm hearing the message loud and clear. Hey, we've been talking for years about how well many aspects of the economy have been doing under President Barack Obama. And only hours, Lewis, after taking over control of the Senate, now having full control of the House and Senate, Republicans started taking credit for the strong economy. Now, remember, the economy has not been strong when the Republicans were not in power. All along, Obama's a disaster, it's all bad, unemployment's bad, wages are bad, stocks are bad, everything's bad. But all of a sudden now, the Republicans not only admit that there is a strengthening economy, but think they are responsible. Here is Mitch McConnell. Listen to this.
After so many years of sluggish growth, we're finally starting to see some economic data that can provide a glimmer of hope. The uptick appears to coincide with the biggest political change of the Obama administration's long tenure in Washington, the expectation of a new Republican Congress.
Yeah, the expectation of a new Republican Congress from November through January, okay, is responsible for a straight line continuation of economic growth that started under President Obama years ago. That's a pretty compelling argument, Lewis. Thanks to the Republicans for the great economy.
Yeah, just the discussion of there being a Republican-controlled Congress, I guess somehow has improved things drastically. Now that they're elected, you would think that things are just going to skyrocket and we're going to be in the best shape ever. This
is total delusion. This is idiocy. It's really hard for me to believe that anyone actually hears Mitch McConnell say that and says, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. But there must be someone who believes it because people elected these clowns.
Maybe, and maybe there's a hint of truth to it. Perhaps, Exxon stock shot up a few cents after it was clear that the Republicans were going to win. But I think that's pretty much where it ends.
We have a great program for you today, including the conclusion to my interview with former fundamentalist evangelical Christian Frank Schaeffer. We have your voicemails. I have a great recommendation for you. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program, as you may have heard me mention once or twice before, is not funded by big corporations or media conglomerates. We're actually funded directly by our audience. And thanks to our audience and today's member of the day, Blanca Garibay, we are able to continue the growth of the program, had a great year in 2014, and hopefully, off to a good start so far in 2015, we will have our next biggest year yet. I would encourage you, if you like the programming, if you think we're doing a good job and you understand the importance of alternatives to corporate media, think about getting a David Pakman Show membership. You can do that at davidpakman.com/membership. And not only are you voting with your dollars in a way that should make everybody feel really good, you also get a bunch of great perks. And we have members-only programming that is also available to all of our paid subscribers. I have a very, very exciting film recommendation today, Lewis. As you know, I am obsessed with North Korea documentaries, and there are so many good ones. We've even interviewed some of the filmmakers who went to North Korea, like Matt Dorzancic, and there is a new one that appeared on my Netflix feed. It is a Frontline episode called The Secret State of North Korea, and this is a really interesting one. It doesn't have the sort of sanitized, PR-approved footage of going to a computer lab in North Korea and you've got 40 people sitting at computers looking at Google, not doing anything, pretending like they're actually on computers on the internet. This one is a combination of footage that has been secretly recorded in North Korea and smuggled out. And I have to admit, some of it is pretty brutal as far as what's going on there. It's as bad as we all imagined and even worse. But it also focuses a little bit more on Kim Jong-un, including his background. And I can't recommend it more highly. I mean, it is such a, it's an oppressive and a sociopathic regime. And hearing about Kim Jong-un and seeing the video of what is happening there is just truly incredible.
It sounds great. Of course, I've watched all the other North Korea documentaries available, and they're all fascinating. So I'm looking forward to watching this one.
So again, this is on Netflix. It's available elsewhere, probably on demand on many cable systems. It is Frontline, Secret State of North Korea. Could not recommend it more highly. And it's not a super full feature-length thing. It's 45 or 50 minutes. You can check it out. Send me your thoughts if you have seen it or if you do, based on my recommendation. We heard from Republicans as they take over control of the House and Senate over the last 48 hours here in the United States, in Washington, D.C., that they will be pushing for passage of the Keystone XL pipeline through a bill that they will certainly be putting together. President Obama, through White House spokesman Josh Earnest, has already said that he would veto such a bill if it were to reach his desk. Wasting no time whatsoever are Republicans on the topic of abortion rather than the Keystone XL pipeline. There is a new proposal, and it's just absolutely insane. On the same day that Republicans were sworn in and took control of the Senate, Republicans Trent Franks and Marsha Blackburn introduced the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which would ban all abortions after 20 weeks. Now, you may remember that Senator Lindsey Graham previously introduced similar legislation, and before Republicans were in control of the Senate, it did not pass the Senate. It now seems as though Republicans could potentially pass something like this in both chambers. I can only assume, since it appears that it would violate the basic tenets of Roe v. Wade, that President Obama would veto such a bill. These are usually called fetal pain measures because they're kind of premised on the idea that fetuses are both capable of feeling pain and viable outside the womb at the 20-week mark in pregnancy. Of course, actual doctors, rather than Republican lawmakers, agree that, number one, the fetus cannot survive outside the womb until about 24 to 28 weeks. There has never been an instance of a viable fetus surviving at 21 weeks or younger. And doctors also agree that, in fact, the fetus cannot feel pain before that point. However, it doesn't really seem to matter to Republicans, Lewis. They are all about stopping abortion in any case. And a lot of this is, unfortunately, late-term abortion is a term that is often used by the right to push anti-abortion legislation. The reality is late-term abortions are incredibly rare, and they actually are almost always connected to situations where there would be significant harm possible to the mother and or just absolutely horrible conditions for the child which were not known earlier during the pregnancy. When the anti-abortion nuts push the anti-abortion bills premised on this idea of late-term abortion, I'm not surprised, Lewis, that they never mention, number one, how rare late-term abortions are, and number two, the reasons why they happen.
Agreed. But I mean, apart from the medical portion of this seems to us like something that people in Congress should probably not be focusing on.
Right.
It seems unnecessary. It probably won't pass anyway. But to be honest, there are probably many, many constituents under these representatives who are all about this and who think that this is a great thing and that their elected officials are doing a great job because of it.
Of course, the so-called family values conservatives, they vote their values, they vote their religion, and they don't really care that this is just a waste of taxpayer dollars pushing legislation that is not going to pass at the federal level. Sounds really fiscally conservative, doesn't it? Small government, not getting involved in the minutiae of people's lives.
Yeah, none of the above. But unfortunately, this is politics in the USA.
There has been an explosion in the ultra-conservative town of Colorado Springs, Colorado, outside the NAACP office, and authorities are saying that it may well be domestic terrorism. The FBI says it is investigating this explosion that happened Tuesday outside the Colorado Springs chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, known as the NAACP, and they believe, quote, certainly domestic terrorism is one possibility, according to Amy Sanders, the media coordinator for the FBI's Denver office. This was a homemade explosive detonated against an exterior wall of a building that houses the NAACP, as well as some other businesses. There were no deaths or injuries from the explosion. Minimal surface damage was done to the wall when the explosion occurred. But chapter president Henry Allen Jr. says the blast was strong enough to knock objects off the wall. It's not yet clear whether the NAACP was specifically targeted, and if so, was it for race-related reasons? Was it for political-related reasons? We don't know. What we do know is that the suspect is a white, balding, 40-year-old man named by the FBI as a person of interest. Bureau says he was driving a white pickup truck from the year 2000 or earlier with paneling, a dark bed liner, an open tailgate, and a missing or covered license plate. Colorado Springs, one of the conservative hubs of this country, Focus on the Family has a visitor center in Colorado Springs. It's considered sort of the evangelical Christian capital of the country by many. Students at Rampart High School in Colorado Springs drive cars riddled with religious bumper stickers. They wear T-shirts covered with depictions of bloody fetuses in opposition to abortion. And former Navy chaplain Gordon Klingenschmitt, now an elected official there, is, well, that's where he is. So we don't yet have all the details, Lewis, but certainly an investigation here into domestic terrorism, not really reported as such by corporate media when it is a potential domestic terrorist incident involving just a white balding dude in the conservative hub of one of the conservative hubs of the planet, not as eager to cover that.
Yeah, it's not that surprising, though. Maybe if the explosion was a bit bigger, maybe if someone died in the blast, it might have more coverage, or but I think in this situation, it's hard to think that this is a situation, something other than domestic terrorism. It really seems like it is, and therefore it does deserve the coverage.
It is sad that sometimes, because of the incompetence of would-be terrorists, because they, in spite of their desires, don't kill that many people or anybody, it doesn't get coverage. It's similar to when Hamas is written off as a terrorist group because, their weapons aren't really that good. And a lot of times they don't really kill that many people or anybody. Their rockets land in the desert. Listen, this was just some 40-year-old nut, and his bomb, if it was indeed targeting the NAACP, it didn't really do that good of a job. So it doesn't really warrant that much coverage. It's not that bad because they failed at doing what they may have been trying to do.
Like coverage on those militias that had plans to do a lot of damage, but never ended up doing any damage because they got caught prematurely. So same type of thing.
Join us on our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So we're speaking with Frank Schaeffer. We've been speaking with him about the book, Why I Am an Atheist Who Believes in God. We've talked about how he got into evangelical Christianity through the Christian community L'Abri that his parents founded. You talked in the first part of our interview, Frank, about how you're moving away from evangelical Christianity coincided, time-wise at least, with the passing of your father. Was that the catalyst that made you revise how you were looking at this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think people understand that only the mob, the mafia, and the British royal family share the same level of nepotistic kind of fatalism that evangelical big-time ministries have. I mean, look at Billy Graham, followed by his son Franklin, who had tried to walk away from the ministry, had a, quote, rebellious youth, and then was corralled back in again. And now he's running this multi-million-dollar outfit, paying himself $1 million+ a year, and, you know, running a mausoleum for his parents down there in the South. Dr. Dobson, half the family on the payroll. Jerry Falwell, his son's running his college now that he started. On and on it goes. So mine was the norm, not the exception. It was like, of course you're going to follow your dad into this. This is where you can earn a living. This is what you've been raised from birth, more or less, to do. So that was it. But when Dad died, you know, I wanted to be an artist. I mean, maybe you can see some paintings behind me on the wall. We're in my studio office here. I was interested in filmmaking, and L'Abri that my parents were running, as I mentioned at the first part of this interview, was very different from most evangelical communities. We had arts festivals, we had poetry readings, we had serious musicians coming through. So my background was not a good fit. And when I moved to the States in 1980, as an adult with a wife and 2 children, and Jeannie was pregnant with our third, and I began to actually try to live within the evangelical subculture that we were leaders in, and really looked at what it was. And I was meeting people who hated the movies I loved and hated the music I loved and didn't like my gay friends and, you know, thought art was of the devil. It was like, holy shit, you know, what have I stumbled into? And so I would come off the road angrier and angrier and angrier with my wife and my kids and my life, and, you know, trying to weigh up, well, then how else do I earn my living? But genuinely feeling not only am I losing my faith entirely and becoming a kind of a flake like these guys, because I don't mean a word of it. Every rock I would turn over and find somebody like Jerry Falwell scurrying out underneath, you know, was horrific compared to my parents'
Frank.
integrity.
So you're saying you were at a point where you were still preaching the material, but you did not believe in it.
No, I did not. And you know what? I get emails today from people who were in a similar position right now, pastors and youth workers and all this, who say, hey, if I could figure out how to earn my living, I'd leave. And they're honest with me about it. I don't know, you know, I guess they trust me. I never publish who these guys are, but trust me, I get this mail all the time.
Yeah.
I did leave. And I'm not saying I'm better than they are. Maybe I was just more desperate and sick of it all. But I wanted to be an artist and a filmmaker. So I got out and I cut a reel from the documentaries I had made with my father, How Should We Then Live, and Whatever Happened to the Human Race, that featured my dad and Dr. C. Everett Koop, and really was the basis of the evangelical pro-life movement. And I cut out all the God bits and theology and just left the nice pans and moves and crane shots and stuff that we had dramatized, so that I had a reel. I got myself an agent. I went to Hollywood and over the next 10 years made 4 very forgettable Hollywood feature films, mostly R-rated action and horror crap. And then I wrote a novel called Portofino, and thank God got good reviews and started to really be a serious writer, and realized that, you know, this is the way I was going to do my art, as well as doing some painting, but mainly through writing. And, you know, that's like 15 books ago, and I've written 5 novels and 10 or so nonfiction works. And, you know, that's sort of my story. But when I got out, I'll be honest with you, Jeannie and I were broke. And it was, oh, crap, what have we done? And I was really close a lot of times to picking up a phone and just calling someone like Pat Robertson and saying, hey, I was wrong. I've been called back into the ministry in some sort of, you know, reconversion story just for the money. But
is that a story? If you were to have called someone like Pat Robertson, would they have been sensitive to that? Would they have accepted you back in, maybe given you a job?
Yeah. I mean, hell, look, Jimmy Swaggart got back in and, he was out there screwing whores. You can always come back. They love conversion stories. Now I've really torn it. I mean, I'm 30 years in and was one of the Huffington Post's first bloggers and Obama's big supporter. And, I'm done now. My goose is cooked. But when I was just doing things like writing novels like Portofino, Zermatt, and Saving Grandma that are works of humor kind of at the expense of the evangelical community, but, not hard-hitting political commentary, I could have come back. But, hey, of course, it's all done now. However, having said that, if I've ever seen grace and God's hand in my life, it was precisely in getting out while I still had a little sanity left. And luckily, being young enough in my late 20s so that I was able to make a new life. And my wife was just so relieved when we got out, and my relationship with both her and my children improved no end because, okay, I'm still a schmuck, but at least I was me, and I wasn't trying to pretend I was this other person.
And along those lines, Frank, in the last few minutes we have left, when you left, as far as your religious beliefs go, I've talked to people who have left their church, but not necessarily their religion in terms of what they believe regarding an afterlife, creation, etc. You left this specific evangelical Christian community and those beliefs, and you consider yourself, as the book says, an atheist who believes in God. What are your religious beliefs today?
Well, let's just take the title. They start with being anti-labeling. People say, how can you be both? And I say, hey, listen, I've never met an atheist or a Christian. I've only met people who are ambivalent on a journey. We change our minds. We feel differently in the morning than the afternoon sometimes. I don't put religion in a special category of truth. I put it in the same category I put relationships, art, politics, everything else. And how do relationships go? Well, I could say I'm a married man who loves my wife and sometimes hates her after a huge fight and we haven't reconciled and we're angry and somebody walks out. There's never a one-size-fits-all label to cover the big moments of life. So what do I believe these days? Precisely what the title says. And that is that I'm a person of faith in the sense that I believe that there is a spiritual dynamic in my life, as I put it in the book, an offstage chorus, as it were, in an opera that you hear out there somewhere. But on the other hand, I am a straight up secular believer in science and evolution and genetics and all the rest of it. So I don't try to reconcile these things. I simply embrace the paradox based on the fact that we're semi-evolved primates at the beginning of an evolutionary process. So why are we making all these vast cosmological statements and sticking people with labels?
Well, now, when you say you believe in God, if we imagine kind of a spectrum of what that could mean, it could mean I believe that that Jesus is the literal Son of God, and there's a kind of personal God in heaven that you meet when you die. And then kind of on the other end would be God as a kind of analogy for there are forces at play that we don't yet understand, and who knows what the meaning is of those. So
well, I'd go further than saying don't yet understand. I would just say, hey, listen, we are never going to understand them. We
don't know that, right?
Well, hey, I was watching Kubrick's 2001 last night, and it's great, but he thought by 2001 we'd be having missions to the far reaches of the universe. Obviously, that didn't happen. We're lucky to get a probe landed somewhere. So I just think, let's back off for a minute and talk about these issues more like we're just having a couple of beers amongst friends. And on that level, I think very few of us, especially the older you get, know very much. So my idea of God is exactly what you just said, and that is this kind of unknown force, what the Orthodox Church and the Eastern mystical tradition calls apophatic theology, which is a theology of not knowing. And so, that's kind of where I am. Now, do I believe all the time? No, of course I don't. But why do I go to a Greek Orthodox church? Because I enjoy the ritual. I like community. I like giving some substance of practice and rites to contemplative moments in my life. And to be honest, I was raised with religion, so I feel comfortable with it. I don't pretend I have the truth or something like that. I just say, hey, this is me. These two things coexist in my life. Hey, that's how I am. What are you like? What's somebody else like? It's not a truth statement versus falsehood. It's just I try to be honest in the book and just say, hey, this is where I'm coming from.
Drastically different than that traditional, what we now see as the evangelical Christian perspective on truth.
Yeah, which is, hey, if you don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, you're going to burn in hell forever. Right. Well, hey, you know what? Not only do I not come from that, just dealing with my own little grandchildren, Lucy, Jack, and Nora, ages 6, 4, and 9 months, that Jeannie and I happen to take care of every day while their parents work. There's nothing these kids could ever do to me or get my name wrong or my birthday or believe the wrong thing or think I had 6 arms that's going to make me burn them forever. So one thing I know for sure, and you can take this to the bank, speaking of unknowing, I kind of know this one. If there is any creative force out there that in some way seeded our evolutionary process with the ability to develop consciousness and empathy, and a guy like me has enough empathy to not want to burn anybody to death forever, again and again and again, let alone his own children, I just don't buy it. So the evangelical theology of damnation is a crock, and it's a crock just based on what we know as human, very imperfect, semi-evolved creatures. So let's stop thinking about a creator that's stupider than we are.
Absolutely. We've been speaking with Frank Schaeffer. I'll remind the audience that the book is Why I Am an Atheist Who Believes in God. Frank, very interesting story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Hey, really, thanks for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All early signs point to Jeb Bush, the brother of former President George W. Bush, the son of former President George H.W. Bush, running for president in 2016. He already has severed ties with a company that he worked for, consulted with, that made a ton of money from the Affordable Care Act. We have to clean up those optics, Lewis. And starting to flip-flop now, not necessarily out of desire. I'm sure that Jeb Bush actually has a pretty established position on many issues, including, in this case, gay marriage, but seemingly flip-flopping out of necessity because the last stance he took on same-sex marriage didn't go over so well. So he said, what the hell, I'm going to come up with a new one. There was a report from the NCRM, which detailed the comments of Jeb Bush about same-sex marriage. And he said, quote, "It ought to be a local decision. I mean, a state decision. The state decided, the people of the state decided, but it's been overturned by the courts, I guess." This was broadly panned by people on the left, and it opened the door for media outlets, including NCRM, to remind readers that Jeb Bush's earlier comments on same-sex marriage seemed quite different, including saying that a same-sex couple's relationship should not be given the same status as opposite-sex couples. It just seems like Jeb Bush is going from headline to headline, saying whatever the last negative response was, I'm going to now adjust my position on this. Talking to the New York Times, now saying, here's another position from Jeb Bush on this. Quote, "We live in a democracy, and regardless of our disagreements, we have to respect the rule of law. I hope that we can show respect for the good people on all sides of the gay and lesbian marriage issue, including couples making lifetime commitments to each other, and that we also need to maintain legal protections for religious liberty." So first he says he doesn't think that there should be the same status for a same-sex couple as an opposite-sex couple. Then he says, well, actually, this is a state decision, and whatever states decide, even if it's for gay marriage, that's okay. And then now taking what is a completely wishy-washy position, Lewis, saying laws exist, but we also need religious liberty, which is kind of like saying, I'm not going to actively campaign against states making decisions, but at the same time, if people disagree with gayness because of their religion, we should respect that too, which seems to me, as what often happens when these guys get pushed around because they want to come up with the most PR-friendly position, it's a meaningless position now.
Pretty much. And welcome to the wonderful world of U.S. Presidential campaign.
Right.
This is great. It's always the same, and it's always the same nonsense. Do we ever really know who our presidential candidates are?
I would love to see Jeb Bush bet someone something related to their position on gay marriage. That would really put together the perfect storm of insanity.
I just would like to see who can have the most ambiguous
Right.
stance on gay marriage or any other issue for that matter.
Marriages exist, love is real, and religion must be respected. I mean, that's kind of like the vaguest thing you could say.
Or you could just nod your head and you leave it at that. It's a joke.
Excuse me, Governor, could you give us your position on same-sex marriage? Marriage. Next question, please. That's essentially the direction we're going. Big news in the medical world. The first new antibiotic in 30 years is being hailed as a potential paradigm shift in fighting resistance to some of the current antibiotics. This is called Teixobactin. It has been found to treat many common bacterial infections such as tuberculosis, septicemia, etc. It might be available within 5 years. For people who aren't aware of why this is such a big deal, and I know a lot of people are not, we've talked about it a little bit, mostly on the bonus show. Although there are over 100 types of antibiotics, maybe even more, there are actually only a few types of antibiotics. You have the penicillin family, you have the cephalosporins, you have the marcolides, you have fluoroquinolones, sulfonamides, tetracyclines, and aminoglycosides. It's only half a dozen or so types. And you can build resistance to an entire type or partial resistance to an entire type by being exposed several times to 1 or 2 or 3 individual antibiotics. And if you have a negative reaction, an adverse side effect to one antibiotic from a certain type, you may have a varying severity of reactions to many of the antibiotics within that type. So while it seems as though there are many antibiotics, there are really only a few kinds, and there has been significant concern, Lewis, that aside from all of the medical advancements with regard to treatment of a variety of diseases, that a big kind of drag down factor in terms of health going forward in the next 10, 15, and 20 years would be increased population resistance to antibiotics because no new types had been developed for 30 years. So this is pretty significant news.
Yeah, that's why this is such a big deal. And I think ultimately, if you look at our time span as people in general, it really, and you look at medicine, it's really not going to take us that long to become resistant to those antibiotics that we're so familiar with right now. And so, it's not going to end here with this one. I mean, we constantly need to be finding new ways to get around this.
A team from Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, discovered a way of using an electronic chip to grow microbes in the soil and isolate their antibiotic chemical compounds, which is pretty interesting stuff and just good science news overall. And like I said, the prediction is within 5 years, this is a new type of antibiotic that would be available. We will see if that happens. If you have any comments at all about our program, please don't hesitate to pick that phone up and call our voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail that came in.
This is the first time I ever watched your show. I'm 69 years old. I live in Tennessee. And, your view on things is so skewed, I can't believe it. Why don't you talk about something that's worth talking about, like how the United States is fixing to lose their reserve currency status, or how the Bush, Obama, Clinton, and all our congressmen and senators have screwed the American public to the wall. And that the dollar's probably going to collapse in the next 4 to 5 years. Talk about something that counts.
Okay, well, listen, we do talk about those issues. And in fact, while many people for decades have been predicting the crash of the dollar has actually strengthened quite a bit over the last 18 months. But putting fact aside for a second, we talk about those issues in context, and we talk about the kind of plutocratic majority that exists among Republicans and Democrats. We do talk about that. But I find in general, when I get emails or voicemails from people who want us specifically and only talking about the Fed, currency manipulation, etc., not that those aren't important issues, but when people only want us to focus on that, typically they're kind of these extreme small government libertarian, often conspiracy theorists. Not that this caller is that, but when people have said to me that those are really the only issues worth discussing, typically that's kind of where they are on the political spectrum. On today's bonus show, what are the 3 topics on the bonus show? It is not the impending collapse of the dollar. One thing we will talk about is a woman who finds her own yearbook picture on a flask. How did that happen? The Tough Mudder competition decides to add tear gas. We will discuss that. And a car explodes outside of a Paris synagogue just hours after the Charlie Hebdo magazine office's attack. We will talk about that and some of the other incidents that took place surrounding before and after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. How do you get access to the bonus show? Go to davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up. You will be supporting strong, independent media and getting some great perks while doing it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.